It is a joy and honor to be able to introduce poet and essayist Lia Purpura. Ever since I heard that Lia was going to be visiting, I've been super excited. Quite simply, she is one of the most esteemed writers in the contemporary creative nonfiction world. Her writing draws from both the classical tradition of the essayist as an introspective philosopher and the contemporary idea of the essayist as a wild explorer in a constantly shifting and untamed form. Take, for example, the topics discussed in her latest collection of essays, Rough Likeness. She, among other things, muses on how she is like a buzzard, the joy and instability of language, the beauty of human excrement, and sea glass. In another writer's hands, topics such as feces and buzzards may rely on gimmicks or hyperbole for their stamina, but not for Lia. Instead, it is her astute observations, delicate subversion, and delight in the world around her that makes her essays continually elegant and surprising, regardless of the topic. And clearly, I am not alone in my appreciation for her work. Lia's work has been awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship, an NEA Fellowship, a Fulbright Translation Fellowship, and 3 Pushcart Prizes, among many other awards and honors. She is the author of 4 books of poetry, 3 essay collections, and 1 collection of translations. And now she's here at the University of Idaho as our distinguished visiting writer. Please welcome Lia Purpura.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. It's been such a pleasure to be here, and I'm having such a good time. Thank you, Brett, for inviting me, and company, all of you who did such a thing. And to Brandon for his deft interviewing skills, to all the students who have been carting me around so generously. You have such a great sense of humor, all of you. And Idaho is way warmer than Baltimore right now. And if weather events go as planned, you may be seeing me for a few more days. I may not be able to get back there, but that's okay. Those things are really good here. I'm going to do a sort of dual reading. I'm here as an essayist. But I'm going to read first from the essays, or 1 essay, I'll see how that goes, and then I'll read from my new collection of poems. So I know I'm supposed to be wearing 1 hat, but you got 2. So I'm going to start with a new essay. You know, because in workshop, we're always asking students to take risks and do new work and then, you know, share it and not worry about it. And so, you know, I'd like to take part in that spirit also. This is very new. And in my interview, I talked a little bit about having to live with a lot of deflections if you're trying to find kind of space and time for art. And I mentioned my sense that there's so much to deflect just to be able to maintain some kind of focus. So this essay speaks to that. It takes the form of a letter to a friend in a kind of loose sense. And it addresses the drive to make something of the difficult looking we have to do in order to find some form of beauty or to make unlikely things beautiful. It's called Entry Cove Conversion Walk. I say Entry Cove in ignorance, to name the world as I can, makeshift, by a phrase that lights on the skin, Entry Cove, a space made in tall grass and darted through, sound enough to constitute a hideaway in a meadow. A cove is generous in definition, a sheltering bay, a cave, gap, or hollow. As I near, an animal slower and heavier than a cat slips in. Cove because I want to follow, everything outside too loud and wrong. Here at the edge of this meadow, late summer, the goldenrod high, the sun warm and air soft, there's a motor, compressor, something violently chewing the quiet, shredding the peace. Hard to locate its origin. Overhead, a plane tears a path into blue sky. Then comes a far train whistle I make romantic to alter the imposition until it turns back to truck horn, turns back to the truck horn it is, and I'm recomposed on the outskirts again, making do. You asked for my impression, you who once lived in this ruined town for years. After just a few days, I'm so hungry I'll take anything. I sift for green moments, accept reduced portions, this circumscribed walk. Some stretches are fine. Rows of stables have been made into offices, and the worn, smooth, silvery boards are intact. Near a once barn, there's a real footbridge arcing over a trickle of creek. And this meadow reprieve, preserve, conscious allotment of wild, it helps. It was a woodchuck, I can see now. She's out and settled on the shorn path, fully adapted to the machinery noise. No wincing or twitching, just nibbling grass. As I move closer, she slips back into the green tangle. Then we do it again. I circle the meadow, and coming around, she's out on the path. I close in, she retreats. Only partly, though, now that she knows it's me. And just as she wagered, I do move along. There's a name for me and the distance I keep. That I can't know it doesn't mean I'm not at this moment being addressed. Though I grew up across the street from a parking lot, it did at least lead to a small county park and a lake, my fancy, my scrap, really only a pond. Half the pond was belted by a path, paved for walking, and half was left wooded. Whole stretches had their microclimates, each distinct and brief as a shiver or a stripe of afternoon sun in the eyes. At the path's beginning was a rocky area where fat white Long Island ducks gathered for handouts. Then a sadder stretch, treeless and too bright, with splintery pilings where old men sat and fished in the murk. Then a relief stretch where the pilings stopped and tough, scrubby grass ran down to the water, willows shaded the banks, and the year-round geese slept. On the far side of the pond, before the woods started, was a rise, an open, mowed area I tried to believe in for years, thought could be used, it should have been used, made productive, trod, tilled, or encamped. But such language wasn't available to me. Plots went undrawn. We weren't a village, there wasn't a harvest, we had dirt and not soil, and no one had earth. The space felt shunned, not left to reverence, not sacred kept, and I couldn't get it to breathe or work or activate. Walking up there was an obligation, an attempt to restore I couldn't say what. Most days, I'd focus past it, move quickly and try not to feel its need. The path ended in a turnaround, and before that loop, with its garbage cans, snarls of fishing line, rusty hooks, was the fence to the woods, called the pit by the neighborhood kids. But it wasn't a pit. It was never a quarry, it had no maw, there was no story, no town legend telling its origin. By pit, they meant only the interval, filler, like TV snow at the end of the dial, before entertainment resolved again. If I felt like testing my footing, I'd climb out and swing around the fence, which leaned far out into the water. Usually I'd just go over, get in fast, and head to the steepest, most embrambled part, vaster feeling, the point furthest from home. So few were the raw places I could get to, spots no words touched where language unhinged. But here, the inclines and outcrops, roots and declivities came not by name, but by pockets of damp, by rock-clustered broods, the way light grew long and padded ground or touched only the crowns of the talls at dusk. Ground gave and resisted, stones rested, stones touched and shifted their backs in the light. Each spot was full of explanations, not answers exactly. I came with no questions, but still, leaf mold, its wet, black layered heart, ferns night coiled or sprung into feather, the spines of fish and big-eyed skulls of birds bent me to them. The midway through was bright, sandy, exposed, so I moved fast there, past the rusty no trespassing signs. I tuned for turtles and snakes, the neat holes of almost never seen snakes, so I could confirm my own hiding. Then coming fully around, there was the neighborhood side again, marked by another fence where I sat and waited for fish to surface or a turtle to clarify on a log. Usually I turned and went back in for another dose, more earth, more time, this shift scent of worm pine, clean sweat and high yeast. Though I knew nothing but the most basic trees and a couple of grasses, that soft greens went by moss and floating greens, algae. I applied these to the damage done by the pit. I went alone. I didn't want to play at hiding or being chased or pass through quickly en route to some other activity. I wanted no chat to scuff the sounds of other lives. It wasn't a forest, it wasn't a marsh. I didn't measure or think in acreage. It was the one place I had where land went rightful, where I could finally stop converting. With certain habits of mind engaged, ruin can be altered or even dissembled. So, say I lived in upstate New York, say Niagara, the chronic, anxious hum of traffic might be recast. That's just the falls. Industrial grinding, just the falls. Flight path, falls. Offloading, falls. I've long been in the business of converting, though not all cases are difficult ones. Some are gentle, sidelong, or slant. Sometimes the shift is agile feeling and not employed to salve or deflect. So a dark bank of late afternoon clouds might become mountains at sunset, plunging us into valley life. Baltimore at the foot of a range, the Cascades. In my car facing west, I speak it, cascades that open, then tumbling icy A, delicious double-click C outcropping. And the air in our valley goes hazy with snow mist, makes all worn things feel glacier rubbed. How good to be, at the end of the day, overseen by something majestic. Or, in a childhood act of conversion, the dim light of warehouses in winter might be turned to cobblestones, gaslit by Leary in his big brown coat, who waved to children who walked the London streets at dusk with ladder and torch, for whom I waited page after page, my own torch, lighting my book in bed. For a long while, I called the churn of waves back home old lace or glassine, and the rich biotic foam, bright spun, along the Long Island shore, until that wouldn't work anymore, and leaks or spills, which sound benign, household even, meant it was time to recast the froth, make it no longer of light and air, and not dissolvable, but dire. In this way, a childhood ends. That is, some tactics no longer work. Some things are impossible to convert. What are trees with all their limbs cut, mute stubs, thumb blunt, a field of pins, a hill of blunts, a very complete desolation? No right mind would draw a forest where a bird couldn't land, make the space leafless so the wind couldn't speak. Saying, after a fire is the best I can do. But a good brisk burn doesn't work that way, and I can't slide a clear cut along the converter. How it used to go, ruined, carried along the moving belt of my hope. My urban versions are just as helpless. That heap of clothing, lamps, mattresses, TVs at the curb, not the chaos of moving, eviction. Those alley puddles, not gathered from rain, not creek swelled and crested, and those flashes of silver, not wet shine or minnow, but needles among the broken glass fathoms. Real change, not conversion, abounds. It does. Here's a branch full of yellow on an otherwise still green oak at the edge of the meadow. Late summer, an actual herald, a season called in, not something to be reconfigured, in need of being eased or staunched. And the luminous parchment shells of cicadas, husks of sycamore bark, and black locust pods I step on for the satisfying crunch, all forms en route to their proper end. No need to see with a strategy, with habits employed to keep back the grief, which anyway overruns the banks I make. You told me it would be desolate here. I suspect it's gotten worse since you left. The downtown's nearly abandoned now, its main streets stretched wide by emptiness, no one out for a little air, no one meeting up for lunch. What's left and still open? The tattoo parlors, cheap beer and pizza dives are brief stops along the interstate. Everything looks like a shed or garage. Every shed or garage has a gray face. Such loss makes the just passing through even faster, while the long dissolve of years gathers and settles in those at work, in liquor stores, nail salons, off-ramp motels like stones, added one at a time to a pocket, the weight unnoticed, until one day all movement's impossible. Dusk here might be convertible if, no, let me stop. Dusk might be unto itself if the lights allowed to catch a breath, if the rough of it's held against the body of a warehouse, loading dock, trailer, if the scene it colors has no name, but I let the light work, haul the ice of it, hurt of it up, if the scene stays uncaptioned, purples and softens, iron peels like bark, like skin, every underside reddens, and the oily puddles iridesce, and I'm in, nowhere else, and it's awful, it isn't, and I don't want to stay, and I stay with it. So that's the first essay. And I think I'll read it. This is kind of a, all right, this is a short essay. Here we go. And this is from Rough Likeness. Here's the buzzard. And this is called Augury. And sometimes an essay or a poem grows from a single discernible image or moment that in an instant communicates something, and then it communicates something wordlessly, and you know very quickly that your task as a writer is to try to find some language for what it is you already understand. So this was a very strange experience that came in that way. and the character takes place near a little lake in the Catoctin Mountains in Pennsylvania. The main characters are a goldfinch, some fishing line, and me. Augury. That hanging bird in the maple tree, someone might come and cut it down, or it might stay and dissolve to bone, blowing through seasons, snared in a mess of fishing line. It must have happened just days ago. The bright body is still heavy and pulls the line tight. If taken down, the absence would mean another's discomfort. And the space where it swings, once open again, a measure of someone's breaking point, a thing too awful to see. Which is very close to what I feel, rounding the bend down by the lake, finding the goldfinch invisibly strung, caught plunging up as goldfinches will, bobbing and looping in jittery arcs when alive. How a very wrong thing inverts the world's laws, stills flight, and proposes air can hold weight. How weirdly suggestive is hanging and swaying. This should be fruit. The form's ends are tapered, the center's a swell of vesicles ripening. Wind should make of it windfall soon. But the coming upon, the space called come upon, with its soft breeze and footpath, torches the idea of harvest, of gleaning, detonates the idea of just taking a walk. A bird pinned in air is a measure of wrongness. Walking can't counter it. Redirecting attention towards kids won't erase it. Even if moving quickly past, no progress instills. The sight can't be siphoned from the scene. The bird's presence impinges like bait. But yellow gets to be glorious too, and its brightness not wholly awful. Such a yellow scours sight, fattens it. It is uncorruptedly lemon-like. And the sharp bolt of black on the wing shines like a whip of licorice. At the end of the path and around the bend, here's the coming upon again. The moment itself doesn't close down. Its brightness is not a slamming door. Yellow's not trying to make up for the end. Time crests there. The weather patterns. Fish in the lake, dogs by the shore with laughing kids. Why must a last moment be made so visible and held aloft? Why must it dangle and shift so softly and keep on making a finality? From it, light rises. On it, light settles. Slippery as tallow, shushing in breeze. I think it's good to be in a place where thought can't form the usual way. And a familiar scene, a bird in a tree, gets overturned, dissembled, made into a precarity. Looked at one way, cornucopic. Tilted another, it goes sepulchral. How close those two can be. Someone might come and cut the bird down, or I will tomorrow. And after the bird's gone, what would be there? As I come through the trees and around the bend, what besides shots of memory? An arc of branches over the lake, a green frame around a spot of blue sky, rowboats in a fringe of rushes, the cattails and milkweed about to burst, and past the tangle, just the lake again. Once that spot worked like a bower. I liked to walk there and pause at the turn and enter it and feel contained. Then into the bower rained a bird, dropped a bird, now swings a bird, hangs a bird. Yellow shines and yellow ripens. Somewhere are sparrows in a field, seen and watched over, the story goes. and counted even as they fall. But come stand in this clearing late afternoon and lean just so. Center the goldfinch in the frame, squint a little, hold in sight a planet, flecklet, blot on sun, a ripe pear, a portent, an airless balloon, a being whose falling was noted, was seen, whose end was tallied by the hand of, if you believe. It's an occasion for wondering what it feels like to believe. So I'll read a short set of poems. These poems are themselves very short, and the task I set myself, well, it became a task, was to stay out of these poems as much as possible, to really not let too much of an I, or even, a discernible I, person, me, in. So I'm really drawn to aphorisms and little sayings, and have been, since I was a kid. And I was interested in working with that sort of brief explosion of kind of dense meaning. So here we go. Some short, they're all about that big. Which is also a fun way to think about your poems, There's so much, thinking and feeling that goes in. Sometimes it's nice to just measure them, like put them on a little scale. Like, this one's done, that one's done, they weigh a lot. I tell my students that's how I grade stuff. I have a little scale. So if you use a big, fat, thick stapler, like the kind that comes out of a staple gun, that's an A. Okay. So, belief. Light being wavy and particulate at once is instructive. Why wouldn't other things or states present as both and? For instance, I both believe and can't. Holding these together produces a wobble I think it's time to take seriously as a stance. There's some physics in there. If you thought you heard it, apparently there's some. So I was talking in my interview about the way time cures work. I don't mean heals or fixes. I mean cures, deepens, toughens, inflavors work. And that allowing a piece to sit, whatever your piece is, and then coming back to it will often create some sort of very new understanding, often kind of revelatory if you let it sit there long enough. Okay. So it's about a certain kind of sense of time, as many of these poems are. Lost Day. The hours aren't latching on or hooking in at all. There isn't any nap to catch. They're sliding around in disguise like gods. It's 2 in the afternoon. It's 4. You can't take these hours apart and repair them. Nothing's wrong with them. They aren't broken. So this next moment, that next poem called Rare Moment, I remember very clearly the origin of this. I was talking with a neighbor about something that happened on his front lawn, which you'll hear about. And I was really aware of talking to him and holding, I think it was a civil and sensible conversation. He's a good friend. But there was a poem going on in the back of my head, so I couldn't be sure about what I was saying to him. But he confirmed that I seemed conscious and present. But this is what was going on in the back of my head. Rare moment. A clear choice is so sweet, not reluctance, but real resistance. Joy to bursting or none. Grief, not gradations. Someone essential and someone not. A good dark strike through versus weighing everything at the end of each day. Look, a cat killed a cardinal on an emerald lawn. For so many reasons, it shouldn't have been beautiful. But that's also the kind of book I like best. Net. I want to go back to the way I lived before, when turning, I'd be up against a wall of books, not a room for chats, wanteds, want yous, for sale lists, lists of meetings in space, which is nowhere. A time when I had a pine floor to wander, and boredom was good, a cool drink I took in, so I could return to work, refreshed, no hope, just secret negotiations with hope taking place. And this is a kind of companion piece called Devices. Time was different. If it was dead, we filled it with thoughts. Trees along the interstate we occupied by seeing, and power lines rising and dipping, we wore those by trying on a phrase they necklaced by. There weren't so many ways to counter the distance everywhere. It was just fine being human and lonely. And here's another along the same, kind of in the same space. Upgrade. It feels wrong to have. It's so easy to use. The old wasn't bad, just that's all there was. Now there's more. And what I had for so long, all that time, while waiting for things to kick on, to warm up, is gone. Time. Having only a little means you take what you've got, or because it's not worth enough, you don't. Like not picking up a penny because it's only a little luck. So this next poem is called Probability. And as I said, I think it was a couple of days ago, sometime when I was here, I tried to read into my ignorance, which is so vast that my reading choices are endless. And I read a really interesting book for, people like me on probability. And I skipped a little bit of the math, not all of it. And I really got it, and it so resonated with my sense of what coincidences are all about, and I got this great note from a mathematician asking to use this poem as sort of entry point to his book on like the math of coincidence and fate, or some really cool title like that. And then I got another note from a statistician, and as a poet, when you get these notes from mathematicians or statisticians, it's just wincingly terrifying, because they will tell you, you got this completely wrong. Or a doctor, telling the audience, telling you, like, that was a nice essay, but you pronounced thoracic wrong. So it's always a little scary. That was right, by the way, thoracic. So this is apparently an accurate view, up until a certain point, about probability. And as Emerson said in his slightly high-minded way, only the poet knows astronomy, which is so nice if you're a poet. But if you take that slant a little bit, what he means is it takes many kinds of knowledge, to get at the full truth of certain concepts. Probability. Most coincidences are not miraculous, but way more common than we think. It's the shiver of noticing being central in a sequence of events that makes so much seem wild and rare. Because what if it wasn't? Astonishment's nothing without your consent. And these are the final two. Allegories. That crag in its hunching suggests a shawl under which we can slip our burdens, since we alone among creatures bestow likenesses for assurance we really exist, and name boulders and peaks widows this, widows that, so others might navigate by the forms of our grief. Here it is. This is about my favorite tense, which I can read here and people will get. Future perfect. Where you were before you were born, and where you are when you're not anymore, might be very close, might be the same place, though neither is as slippery as being here, but imagining where you will have been, that point where things land, are finished, over, and gone, but not yet. So thank you for coming. To take your questions, should there be any.
Okay, so when you're writing like a poem or a short story, do you let like what your mind wants it to be or expects it to be have a say in what it becomes, or do you have like a method of removing your expectation or what it could become out of the process?
Wow. Could you hear that? Back in there?
I can try to say it louder.
Do you mind standing
Yeah, no,
up and
absolutely.
saying it so people can see?
So my question is, when you're writing a short story or a poem, do you let what your expectation of what it's going to be and what you want it to be or what it could become, do you let that have a say in the writing process, or do you have a method of removing that expectation while writing?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yes, I have a method of removing that expectation, and it is called being as dumb as possible. And listening to sounds, and trying to hear what's coming and trying to see what's sort of appearing visually and not attempting to direct the poem or essay too early on, but to take down what seems like it might be incongruous or somehow not fitting, but trusting somehow that it probably is, you know, these clashing images or odd juxtapositions probably do want to go together, and I just don't know how yet. So it's kind of a sense of holding back on the editorial kinds of skills until way, way later, so that that sort of judgment doesn't come in too soon. I can't see anything.
Where do you take your inspiration from most often for your essays?
Where do I take my inspiration from? I don't know if I take it as much as it's kind of given. So I walk a lot, and I am, as I think the essays showed, really engaged in trying to see what's going on in the natural world and see ways that it's compromised and how, like, physically we live with that or mediate that or convert that. And I'm interested in looking at stuff I shouldn't be looking at, which I often do politely, because I was taught manners, so there's a way of looking sidelong and not looking like you're looking. And, you know, otherwise, reading before writing is a tremendous kind of stoking and inspiration as well. And contrary to what, you know, a lot of students fear, you know, you'll get somebody else's voices in your head and you won't be able to work on your own stuff. I don't think that's true at all. You know, there are sounds and patterns and motions and you know, images that will lead you, will teach you, and to give over to that before writing, I think, is incredibly healthy. So that's always a form of inspiration. And then once you get going, you know, and have some set of whatever, essays or poems, you bump into sets of ideas and ways of being and ways of thinking that belong together, that are familial, and you can sort of dip into that spot. And, you know, people, this is often called a set of concerns, which I can't stand as a term. I don't have concerns. It sounds like something you should, like, work out in therapy. Here are my concerns. But you have a set of, you know, interests and conundrums, and you can sort of dip into those for further inspiration. If you have a question, you just have to shout, because I really can't see.
So, kind of pertaining to the first question, when you were talking about just dumbing everything down, being as dumb as possible, like, when you're trying to get into that mindset of your work being second nature, you know, so you can kind of just like feel it out like that, do you have any like processes that you go through, like for you know, you said like taking a walk or like driving around in the car, so you're like more focused on the road and less focused on like what you're working on, or like is there anything for you personally?
Yeah. So, you know, the process of remaining as dumb as possible requires certain stuff, you know, you shouldn't do, which is check the machine. Don't check the machine when you're bored. Or not bored. Don't check the machine when you come to the end of, you know, a sentence or a paragraph. That space right there is gold. Sit with that little emptiness, that little agitation, and that sense of nervousness, or, yeah, I know it's anxious, right? But don't fill it up with other stuff. You can do that later, you know, to your heart's content. But if you're writing, you know, that is a space you want to learn to draw on and endure and listen into. You know, that's a thing not to do. But a thing to do is, you know, get up and walk. And often, you know, you can keep it a problem in your head as you're walking. And the physical rhythm of moving through space will often, you know, often leads me very quickly, or more quickly, more directly, to some kind of set of possibilities and set of responses, right? So it's, you know, dumb in the sense that I'm not, you know, trying to think it out, but trying to walk it out.
Okay, so I'm curious, I've been teaching on looking and rough like this for a few years, and what I try to tell the students to pay particular attention to is there's a sense of just raw curiosity, and that seems to be tied in with an idea of perception. And the students often comment, or I sort of hope that they comment, that the curiosity is never always resolved, or is not always resolved. And I was wondering if you could talk about that sense of curiosity a little bit.
The sense of curiosity not being resolved is really intriguing. And I think the adventure of the conjecture, which is something that an essay can do, move into conjectures, into indeterminate statements, into provisional statements, is one of the, you know, great joys of the form. The sense of, it could be this, maybe it's that. Let's look at these two things together. Let me ask this question of this image or person or feeling. All of that can sort of be left in the essay because the form can hold it. So you can hold a lot of these questions together and not resolve, because what's important in an essay is the quality of thought and the shape of an image and the shape of language that's expressing, you know, the question. So I think the form itself is kind of a perfect vehicle for open-ended questioning and a place to behave like, you know, you're sort of inner 2-year-old. You know, every time, why? Why is this? Because this. Well, why? Because this. Why? Because this. But why? So, is that,
Yeah, that's great.
Is that
Can we give one more round of applause for Lia?